Tom Verducci also writes for Sports Illustrated, joining us on the show. Tom, I was just talking about, when was the moment, do you remember the year, the month, the moment when football rose above baseball as far as popularity?
Great question. Believe it or not, the beginnings of it might have been the 94 and 95 strike. I think people got out of the habit, if you will, and really ticked off at the game. And it took a while. People came back. They eventually came back. But it's like, your favorite restaurant closes, renovations, or change of ownership for a half a year. In the meantime, you find somewhere else to go, and you say, this place is pretty good. And I think that's where it began.
But you also, and I even said this up front, this isn't a let's bash the World Series or these two teams matching up. I'm just curious that, did baseball, was it something baseball did, aside from the strike, or is it something that the NFL did? Because people will gamble on football. Baseball had the first fantasy leagues. They were called rotisserie leagues. So you had the interaction there. You had these leagues there, but I don't know if it's gambling or there's, the bite-sized portions of the NFL that it's week to week and it's, games over the weekend, and where baseball, there's just too much baseball. Did that all factor in here?
Absolutely. Football in our society is much more event-oriented. And the best thing about baseball is kind of one thing that people don't like is that there's so many games.
Yeah.
But you hit on also the fantasy aspect of it thing. I think that got people involved in multiple teams. When your football team gets knocked out in the playoffs, you're still watching the playoffs.
Yeah.
In baseball, and it wasn't always this way, your team gets knocked out, your season's done in September, you might not check out the postseason until the World Series. The biggest difference to me is teams following other teams in the postseason in the NFL. They don't do that in baseball.
What's a better story here, the Royals or the Giants winning their third in the last 5 years?
Well, to me, when you watch the game tonight, you'll say it's the Royals, because when you haven't won for 29 years, the last time the Royals were in the World Series, it really is like the first time. So the amount of enthusiasm, both with the players and the people and the fans, is a wow factor in this series because it is so new. I saw a great story the other day that the sporting goods stores around here in Kansas City, for the first time, they're stocking cold weather gear with Royals logo. I'm talking about jackets, sweatshirts, things like that. They never had that before because nobody was following baseball in September and October for almost 30 years.
But you also look at the Giants. To win 3 in the last 5 years would equate to a dynasty in today's terminology. But I don't think people look at the Giants as a dynasty.
No, I don't know if there must be another word there that's not quite a dynasty, Dan, a mini dynasty or something. I mean, you can't be a dynasty for me and basically take years off, which the Giants have done in those even-numbered years where they were under 500. So you don't have that literal year-to-year run that you want from a dynasty. But in this day and age, just to get back, I mean, well, listen, let's rewind to the end of August. We all thought Oakland and Detroit, with the trades they made for the starting pitchers, were going to run the table in the postseason. Obviously they're gone. So to get through these rounds, and for the Giants this year, it's 4 rounds, and to do it 3 years out of 5, that's pretty darn impressive.
The wild card and the fact that these are wild card teams, and I think we've seen a pattern here, not just in this sport. You've seen the teams that basically are playing playoff baseball before the playoffs, and they do benefit because by the time these other teams sort of get in that mode, it's too late.
I think there is something to that, Dan, but I also think there's more than one way to win a World Series. I mean, last year we had the 2 teams with the best record in each league, in St. Louis and Boston, and we weren't talking about wild cards last year. I do think in this case with these 2 teams, it's not so much the wild card because let's face it, the Royals were on the razor's edge in that game against Oakland. You're down 7-3 to John Lester in the 7th inning, and it looks like you're playing golf the next day. But I think what both these teams do is they play October baseball better than they do April through September. In other words, they play very clean games. They're very comfortable in low-scoring games. They have tremendous bullpens. And with all the off days now in the postseason, you never have a guy where the manager says, this relief pitcher, he's not available today. I have to stay off him. I've used him 3 days in a row. I mean, the Royals have had 14 days off. They've had more off days than game days in the postseason. That's not a regular season rate, but it works well for them because they have so much bullpen coverage.
He's Tom Verducci of Sports Illustrated. Also, Fox, they'll have Game 1 tonight. Starts at 7:30 Eastern. I mentioned this yesterday. Richard Sandomir in the New York Times was talking about baseball, and there was a time when 50 million people were watching a World Series game. The 1980 Phillies. I mean, when you think about it now, when we look at big audience numbers, 50 million people were watching baseball back then.
Yeah, it's crazy. And that was against Kansas City.
Yes.
There were markets there. Toronto against Atlanta put up huge numbers in the early 90s. But listen, as you know, Dan, you really can't compare just about any ratings because the broadcast world has changed so much. There's so many options out there, especially for young kids. Some of the things, video gaming, people are watching that as a sport. Back then it was baseball, and it was baseball, and that was it. And the Sunday football games were all in the afternoon. So there's so much competition out there. But I think, Dan, that baseball is stronger than it's ever been regionally.
Yes.
And it certainly plays out when you look at attendance and resources and revenues and local ratings. It just hasn't been as strong nationally.
Any changes in the offseason you see for Major League Baseball that we should be aware of?
Well, I think they will tweak the instant replay rules a little bit, probably allow more things to be replayed. They started out saying, let's put some governors on this because we don't want to stop the game a million times. But I think they found out there's some things that do need to be changed. There was a game where the batter got hit by the ball in the batter's box on a foul ball. The umpires didn't see it. Replay, it was obvious it should have been a foul ball, and it wasn't called because it wasn't reviewable. I think they'll fix that. The home plate collision rule, I've never liked. I like it because nobody got trucked at the plate this year. That it did protect catchers, but there's too much ambiguity in the rule. That needs to be tightened up. But otherwise, I think you're going to see Rob Manfred, at least in year one, just kind of stay the course from what Bud Selig put in place. And I think any other bigger changes, I think, are probably a year or two away, including anything regarding pace of game. They have a committee. You know how baseball works, Dan. These committees take their time. I wouldn't expect anything next week. So
I like that we have a committee to speed up the game, but they're slow in speeding up the game.
We need to speed up the committee.
Yes, yeah. Any change with Pete Rose? He seemed like he was alluding to the fact that somehow, some way, eventually, he's going to get on the ballot for the Hall of Fame.
I don't see it happening. I don't think just because there's a change of commissionership, there's a change in his status. I kind of agree with Pete. I'd like to think there's an avenue somewhere where he does get on a ballot. You'll never see him in a major league uniform again in any kind of official capacity. I think that status remains. But remember, they changed the rule a couple of years before Pete was eligible on the ballot. They saw a loophole, and they said, we got to keep this guy off the ballot. Let's come up with a rule that says if you're on the restricted list, you can't be on a Hall of Fame ballot.
Yeah.
And Pete Rose rule has kept Pete Rose out.
Before I let you go, I was wondering this. Somebody asked me this morning, who's the underdog in the World Series? I said, well, Kansas City might be a better top-to-bottom team, and they're probably viewed as the underdog. Is that a fair assessment here?
That's a great question. I think the Giants are a slight underdog only because the Royals have home field advantage, and that obviously goes back to the All-Star game. No one has won a Game 7 on the road since 1979 in the World Series, and I know I'm dying to see a Game 7. We've only had one in the last 11 years. It's the first time it's ever happened in the World Series era. And I'll tell you, we got a good shot with these two teams because you just hit on something, Dan. What's the separation between these two teams? It's hard to know who's the underdog and who's the favorite team. They're really so closely matched. So I would say the Royals are slightly favored only because of home field advantage. Neutral field, it's a coin flip.
Oh, one more item here. You got a new general manager with the Dodgers, and you bring him in from Tampa, and I think the natural feeling is it's sort of the pipeline to bring Joe Madden to Los Angeles. Do you see that eventually happening, that Joe Madden is the skipper of the Dodgers?
It could. And let's not sell Andrew Friedman short because his title now is president. Have you noticed that? Now we have presidents who then hire a general manager. So this way they have the manager and the general manager as kind of body shields when things go wrong. But I do think, Madden's contract is up in 2015, and I think there's a point in Tampa or St. Petersburg And Friedman hit this where you get frustrated that things don't change. I mean, they had that great run to the World Series in '08. That's when you usually get a pop in attendance. Is the next year they didn't get it at all. And got scared some people. That's never going to be successful in that venue. So it wouldn't surprise me. For now, he's saying Donnie Mattingly is my manager. But listen, that job is year to year in L.A. as the Dodger manager, no matter who the GM is. But I think, listen, they love Joe Madden. I think he's one of the top 5 managers in baseball. But it wouldn't shock me if he says, I got to find out what it's like somewhere else to play with some resources.
Have fun tonight. Tell Joe and Harold we said hello. Thank you, Tom.
Will do. Thanks, Dan.
That's Tom Verducci, Sports Illustrated, and also Fox Game 1 coming up tonight.